The gunshot echoed through the valley, a stark reminder that life in the Montana Territory of 1878 was as unforgiving as the approaching winter. Marigold Owens clutched her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders, watching as the last train of the season pulled away from Clearwater Station, leaving nothing but a trail of black smoke against the purple-gray sky. Her trunk sat at her feet, containing everything she owned in the world, which wasn't much. The station platform was empty save for her solitary figure, abandoned like a forgotten promise. The letter in her pocket felt heavy, the one from her fiancé, who'd promised to meet her here but was nowhere to be seen. 6 months of correspondence had led her across the country from Boston to this remote outpost in Montana Territory, only to find herself utterly alone as darkness approached. A cold gust of wind swept across the platform, carrying with it the first snowflakes of the season. Marigold shivered, feeling the temperature drop precipitously. The station master had locked the waiting room and departed on horseback an hour ago, offering nothing but a pitying glance and directions to a boarding house 3 miles down the rutted road, an impossible journey on foot with her trunk as night fell. "Madam," the deep voice startled her. She turned to find a tall figure approaching from the hitching post, where a dappled gray horse stood patiently. The man wore a well-worn hat, its brim pulled low against the wind, but she could make out a strong jawline covered in a few days' stubble. His sheepskin coat was weathered but sturdy, and he moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in this harsh landscape. "You appear to be stranded," he said, his voice carrying a gentle tone that contrasted with his rugged appearance. Marigold hesitated, her mother's warnings about speaking to strange men flashing through her mind, but circumstances had left her with few options. "Yes, I was meant to be met by someone, but it seems they've forgotten." The man's eyes, a startling blue that reminded her of summer skies, scanned the empty platform. Without hesitation, he shrugged out of his coat, revealing broad shoulders covered by a faded blue shirt. He laid the coat on the rough wooden boards of the platform. "Here," he said simply, gesturing to the garment. "Sit a while. I'll fetch us some coffee from my saddlebag. You look half frozen, and we need to figure out what to do with you before this snow gets worse." The simple kindness, the first she'd experienced in days of travel, nearly brought tears to her eyes. "I'm Yates Irving," he added, extending a calloused hand. "Most folks just call me Yates." "Marigold Owens," she replied, taking his hand briefly before settling onto the coat. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Irving." "Yates," he corrected with a small smile. "Mr. Irving was my father, and he's been gone 8 years now." As he walked to his horse, Marigold took stock of her situation. The train had departed. Her supposed fiancé was nowhere to be found. Night was falling, and snow was beginning to accumulate on the platform. Yet somehow, the appearance of this stranger made her feel less desperate than she had just moments before. Yates returned with a small tin pot and a leather-wrapped package. "I've got coffee and some jerky. Not much of a meal, but it'll warm you some." He knelt down, using a flint to light a small, contained fire in what appeared to be a portable tin stove from his saddlebag. "You're prepared," Marigold observed, watching him work. "Out here, being unprepared means being dead," he replied matter-of-factly. "Winter's coming early this year. I can smell it." While the coffee heated, he asked, "Mind telling me who you were waiting for? Might help me figure where they've got to." Marigold hesitated before withdrawing the letter from her pocket. "His name is Theodore Blackwell. We've been corresponding for 6 months. He works at the mill outside of town, or so his letters said. He asked me to come, sent me train fare, and—" She trailed off, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. Yates's expression darkened. Theodore Blackwell. Madam, there's no Theodore Blackwell at any mill around these parts. There's no mill at all outside Clearwater. The revelation hit Marigold like a physical blow, but his letters. He described everything so vividly. Yates sighed, pouring the now boiling coffee into 2 tin cups. I'm afraid you may have fallen victim to a mail-order bride scheme. Some men place advertisements, correspond with city women, send them money to travel west, then never show up. He handed her a cup. They do it for sport or because they're drunk or just plain cruel. Marigold felt her world crumbling around her. 6 months of planning, of dreaming, of carefully packing her meager possessions all for nothing. What am I to do now? She whispered, more to herself than to him. Yates considered her situation as he sipped his coffee. Well, first things first. You need shelter for the night. There's a respectable boarding house in town run by Mrs. Gunderson. It's too far to walk in this weather, but my horse can carry us both. I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition when the alternative is freezing to death, he said firmly. Tomorrow, we can see about getting you situated more permanently. Clearwater's small, but we take care of our own. I'm not one of your own, she reminded him. You are now, he said with a finality that brooked no argument. Drink your coffee. We'll head to town once you're warmed up some. As they finished their coffee in companionable silence, Marigold studied her unexpected savior. He wasn't what she would call handsome in the conventional sense, his face too weathered, his hands too rough, but there was something compelling about his straightforward manner and quiet strength. What do you do, Mr. Irving Yates? She asked, correcting herself. I run cattle on a small spread about 10 miles north of town. Nothing fancy, but it's mine, free and clear. Pride colored his voice. I come into Clearwater once a week for supplies and to check the telegraph office for news from back east. And today was your supply day, he nodded. Lucky for you. I was running late. Normally, I'd have been gone before your train arrived. Lucky indeed, she murmured, wondering if perhaps Providence had played a hand in her misfortune. When they finished their coffee, Yates efficiently packed away his portable stove and cups. He helped Marigold to her feet, lifting her trunk as if it weighed nothing. I'll secure this behind the saddle. Can you ride? I grew up in Boston, she admitted. I've never been on a horse, he nodded, unsurprised. You'll ride in front of me then. I'll keep you steady. The intimacy of this arrangement made Marigold hesitate, but another blast of cold wind decided for her. Yates lifted her onto the horse's back with practiced ease, then mounted behind her, his arms creating a secure circle around her as he took the reins. Lean back against me if you need to, he instructed. Storm's picking up. It'll be a cold ride. The journey into Clearwater took nearly an hour through the increasing snowfall. Marigold found herself grateful for Yates's solid presence behind her, his body heat providing more warmth than she cared to admit. As they rode, he pointed out landmarks obscured by the growing darkness and snowfall: the church steeple, the general store, the sheriff's office. Clearwater proved to be smaller than Marigold had imagined, perhaps a dozen buildings along a main street, with scattered homes and farms extending outward. They stopped before a 2-story clapboard house with yellow light glowing from several windows. Mrs. Gunderson's boarding house, Yates explained, dismounting before helping Marigold down. Her legs felt strange after the ride and she stumbled slightly. His hand steadied her elbow until she regained her balance. Thank you, she said, meaning it for more than just the steadying hand. Let's get you inside, he replied, retrieving her trunk. Mrs. Gunderson makes the best apple pie in 3 counties. If we're lucky, there might be some left. The boarding house door opened before they reached it, revealing a stout woman with iron gray hair pulled into a severe bun. Despite her stern appearance, her eyes were kind. "Yates Irving, what are you doing out in this weather? And who's this you've brought me?" Her gaze fell on Marigold, taking in her city clothes and obvious exhaustion. "Mrs. Gunderson, this is Miss Marigold Owens. She needs a room for the night, maybe longer." Yates briefly explained the situation while Marigold stood embarrassed, feeling like a fool for being so easily duped. To her surprise, Mrs. Gunderson's face showed no judgment, only compassion. "You poor dear. You're not the first, and I doubt you'll be the last. Come in, come in. I've got stew simmering, and yes, Yates, there's apple pie." The boarding house was blessedly warm, a large stone fireplace dominating the common room. Several men looked up from their newspapers and card games, nodding respectfully before returning to their activities. "These are my regular boarders," Mrs. Gunderson explained. "Mostly men who work at the mercantile or the livery. All respectable." The emphasis on the last word was clearly for Marigold's benefit. After being shown to a small but clean room upstairs, Marigold returned to the dining room where Mrs. Gunderson served bowls of hearty stew and thick slices of fresh bread. Yates had removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. He'd washed up, and in the warm light of the dining room, Marigold noticed details she'd missed in the growing darkness outside the laugh lines around his eyes, a small scar above his right eyebrow, the way he thanked Mrs. Gunderson with genuine warmth. "What will you do now?" he asked quietly when they were relatively alone at the end of the long table. Marigold considered the question. "I don't know. I can't afford passage back east, and even if I could, there's nothing there for me anymore." She hesitated before admitting, "My parents died last winter. The family home was sold to pay debts. I was working as a seamstress when I saw Theodore's the advertisement." Yates nodded thoughtfully. "You have skills then. That's good. Clearwater needs a seamstress, old Mrs. Abernathy does some mending, but her eyesight's failing and the nearest dressmaker is in Helena. You think I could stay here, make a life?" The idea seemed simultaneously terrifying and hopeful. "I know you could," he said with quiet confidence. "Western towns need capable women even more than they need men. You'll find your place, if you want it." The conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Gunderson bringing apple pie still warm from the oven. The first bite nearly brought tears to Marigold's eyes, not just from the perfect balance of tart apples and sweet cinnamon, but from the realization that perhaps all was not lost. Perhaps this misadventure could be the beginning of something, rather than just a humiliating end. As they finished their pie, Marigold noticed Yates checking the large clock on the mantel. "You need to get home before the storm worsens," she guessed. He nodded. "I've got livestock to see to. I'll be back in town on Saturday, that's 4 days from now. If you need anything before then, Mrs. Gunderson knows how to reach me." "You've already done far more than I had any right to expect," Marigold said earnestly. Yates stood, retrieving his hat. "It was nothing any decent man wouldn't do." Mrs. Gunderson snorted from nearby. "Don't let him fool you, Miss Owens. Plenty of men in these parts who'd have left you standing there or worse." She patted Yates's shoulder affectionately. "This one's got a good heart beneath all that trail dust." Yates looked embarrassed but pleased by the compliment. "I'll see you Saturday, Miss Owens. By then, you'll have figured out if Clearwater suits you." "I'm certain it will," she replied, surprising herself with how much she meant it. After he departed, Mrs. Gunderson helped Marigold settle into her room, providing a nightgown and fresh towels. "That Yates Irving," she said conversationally as she turned down the bed. "Finest man in the territory. Works harder than 2 ordinary men and never complains. Built his ranch from nothing after his folks died in that influenza outbreak back in '70. He mentioned his father passed away, Marigold said. Both parents and his little sister, all in one terrible week. He was just 20 then. Buried them himself when no one would come near for fear of catching it. Mrs. Gunderson shook her head at the memory. Some thought he'd break or turn mean like some men do after such tragedy. Instead, he just worked. Built that ranch acre by acre, head of cattle by head of cattle. He's not married, Marigold asked, then immediately felt her cheeks flush at the forwardness of the question. Mrs. Gunderson's eyes twinkled. No, though not for lack of interested parties. The Wilcox girl from over Helena Way practically throws herself at him whenever her family visits. But Yates, he keeps to himself mostly, says he's waiting for the right woman, one who loves the land as much as he does. After Mrs. Gunderson left, Marigold sat on the edge of the bed, contemplating the strange turn her life had taken in a single day. She had arrived in Montana territory expecting to meet her future husband, a man who didn't exist. Instead, she'd met a cowboy who'd laid his coat down for her and shown more genuine kindness in a few hours than she'd experienced in months back east. As she drifted off to sleep, the howling wind outside contrasted with the warmth of the boarding house. For the first time since learning of her parents' deaths, Marigold felt something like hope taking root in her heart. Whether it was for Clearwater, for a new beginning, or for a pair of summer sky blue eyes, she wasn't entirely sure. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the storm having moved eastward overnight, leaving 6 inches of fresh snow covering everything. Marigold dressed in her warmest clothes, pitifully inadequate for Montana winters. She now realized and made her way downstairs to find Mrs. Gunderson already preparing breakfast for her boarders. "Good morning, dear. Sleep well." The older woman flipped flapjacks with practiced ease. "Better than I expected," Marigold admitted, rolling up her sleeves. "May I help?" Mrs. Gunderson looked pleased. "You're welcome to stir the porridge." Most of these men would eat shoe leather if it was hot and had enough gravy, but I try to give them something decent. As they worked side by side in the kitchen, Mrs. Gunderson provided a thorough education on Clearwater and its inhabitants. Marigold learned that the town had been established just 15 years earlier, first as a trading post and then growing as ranchers and a few farmers settled the area. "We're small but growing," Mrs. Gunderson explained. "Got ourselves a proper church 3 years back, and Sheriff Donovan keeps the peace well enough. The saloon gives him trouble some Saturday nights, but nothing too serious." After breakfast, Mrs. Gunderson introduced Marigold to Mr. Hoffman, the proprietor of Clearwater's general store. The German immigrant had a booming voice and an impressive mustache that seemed to have a life of its own. "A seamstress. Wunderbar," he exclaimed when Mrs. Gunderson explained Marigold's skills. "My wife has been begging me to find someone who can make proper dresses. The ready-made ones from the catalog never fit her right." By midday, Marigold had not only secured work doing alterations and mending for the store, but had also been introduced to 3 women who immediately commissioned new dresses for the upcoming Christmas social. Mr. Hoffman even offered her a small corner of the store where she could set up a sewing area. "I can pay you $2 a week to start, plus whatever you make from commissions," he offered. "Fair." Considering she'd earned barely that in Boston working 12-hour days in a cramped, poorly lit workshop, Marigold readily agreed. That evening at dinner, Mrs. Gunderson announced that Marigold would be staying on as a permanent resident. "And I'm reducing her board since she'll be helping with breakfast and supper," she added. "Any of you men need mending, Miss Owens will be working at Hoffman starting tomorrow." The boarders, 5 men ranging in age from perhaps 25 to 60, all welcomed her with courteous nods. Mr. Peterson, the oldest, a retired schoolteacher with a scholarly air, even offered to lend her books from his considerable collection. "Not much entertainment in Clearwater during winter," he explained. "Books keep the mind from freezing along with the landscape." By Saturday morning, Marigold had established a routine. She helped Mrs. Gunderson with breakfast, spent the day at Hoffman's General Store working on alterations and meeting with potential clients, then returned to help with supper. The work was enjoyable, the townspeople welcoming, and for the first time in years, she felt useful and appreciated. When Saturday arrived, Marigold found herself watching the street from her workstation at Hoffman's more often than she cared to admit. Yates had said he would come to town today, and though she told herself her interest was merely gratitude, the fluttering sensation in her stomach suggested otherwise. It was mid-afternoon when the bell above the store's door jangled, and Yates stepped inside, stomping snow from his boots. His eyes found her immediately, and the smile that spread across his face made the fluttering in her stomach intensify. "Miss Owens," he greeted, removing his hat. "Mrs. Gunderson said I'd find you here." "Mr. Irving," she returned, setting aside the shirt she'd been mending. "How are your cattle faring in this cold?" "They're tough beasts," he replied, approaching her workstation. "Much like the people out here have to be." His gaze took in her sewing area, the stack of work waiting to be done. "I see you've found your place already." "Everyone has been very kind," she said. "Mr. Hoffman has been particularly generous." The store owner, overhearing his name, joined them. "Miss Owens is a godsend. Already has orders for 6 dresses and more mending than she can handle. I am thinking of ordering more fabric from Helena." Yates looked pleased. "Glad to hear it. Clearwater needs people with skills." He turned back to Marigold. "I was wondering if you might join me for supper at the hotel dining room tonight. It's no fancy Boston restaurant, but the food's decent." The invitation caught her off guard. "I usually help Mrs. Gunderson with supper. I already asked her," Yates admitted, a hint of color touching his cheeks. "She said she can manage without you just this once." Mr. Hoffman chuckled. "Go on, Miss Owens. Young people should enjoy themselves while they can." These old bones remember what it was like. Caught between embarrassment and pleasure, Marigold nodded. "I would enjoy that very much, Mr. Irving." "Yates," he reminded her gently. "Yates," she repeated, enjoying the way his name felt on her lips. At 6 o'clock, Marigold found herself seated across from Yates in the small but respectable dining room of the Clearwater Hotel. She wore her best dress, a dark blue wool that brought out the color of her eyes, and had spent more time than usual arranging her honey-brown hair. Yates had cleaned up as well, wearing a crisp white shirt under his usual vest, his dark hair still damp from what must have been a recent washing. They made an attractive pair, judging by the approving glances from the other diners. "So tell me how your week has been," Yates said after they ordered. "Honestly." Marigold considered the question carefully. "It's been unexpected. When I boarded that train in Boston, I thought I knew what my future held. Now everything is different, yet somehow better than I imagined." "Better than marrying a man you'd never met?" Yates looked skeptical. "Better than marrying a man who only wanted a housekeeper he didn't have to pay," she clarified. "That's what most of these arrangements are, aren't they? Men wanting wives to cook and clean and bear children without much concern for who the women actually are." Yates nodded slowly. "That's often true. Life out here is hard, especially for those trying to make a go of it alone, but that doesn't make it right to mislead someone. What about you?" Marigold asked, emboldened by his candor. "Why have you never married?" If he was surprised by her directness, he didn't show it. "Came close once about 5 years back. Mary Sutton, the banker's daughter from Helena. Pretty, educated back east like yourself. We courted for nearly a year." What happened? Yates's expression turned reflective. Winter came. She stayed with me at the ranch during a blizzard similar to the one we just had. 3 days of howling wind, temperatures so cold the water froze in the bucket inside the house. By the time the storm cleared, she'd decided ranch life wasn't for her, he shrugged. Can't blame her. It's not an easy life, especially for a woman used to city comforts. I'm sorry, Marigold said, genuinely meaning it. Don't be. Better to learn before vows are exchanged than after. He smiled slightly. Besides, it taught me something important. What's that? That the right woman for me isn't necessarily the one with the finest education or the prettiest face. It's the one who can look at a blizzard and see the beauty in it alongside the danger. The one who understands that everything worth having out here has to be fought for. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their food: venison steak for Yates, chicken and dumplings for Marigold. As they ate, they discovered mutual interests in reading and music, though Yates admitted his piano playing was rough enough to make the cats howl. My mother insisted I learn, he explained. Said every civilized household needed music. After she died, I kept playing. Helps me remember her. I'd like to hear you play sometime, Marigold said. Only if you promise not to laugh, he countered with a grin. As the evening progressed, Marigold found herself increasingly drawn to this man who combined frontier ruggedness with unexpected depths. He spoke intelligently about everything from cattle breeding to politics, listened attentively to her opinions, and made her laugh with dry observations about local characters. After dinner, he walked her back to the boarding house, the moonlight casting long shadows across the snow-covered street. The temperature had dropped sharply, and Marigold shivered despite her shawl. Without a word, Yates removed his coat and draped it around her shoulders, much as he'd laid it on the platform for her that first day. You'll freeze, she protested. I'm used to it, he assured her, though she noticed him suppressing a shiver. Besides, we're almost there. At the boarding house steps, they paused. Marigold reluctantly removed his coat, handing it back to him. Thank you for a lovely evening. It's been the most enjoyable one I've had in a very long time. Yates seemed to hesitate, then asked, Would you consider visiting the ranch someday? When the weather's better, of course. It's nothing fancy, but I'm proud of what I've built. The invitation warmed her more than the coat had. I would like that very much. Good. He smiled, looking relieved. I'll be back in town next Saturday. Perhaps we could go for a ride if the weather holds. You need to learn to sit a horse properly if you're staying in Montana territory. Are you offering to teach me? I'm a patient teacher, he assured her, his blue eyes reflecting the moonlight. And you strike me as a quick study. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Finally, Yates stepped back. Good night, Marigold. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and she liked the way it sounded in his deep voice. Good night, Yates. As she watched him walk away, Marigold realized that the path her life had taken, though unexpected, felt right in a way she couldn't fully explain. She'd come to Montana seeking security in the form of marriage to a stranger. Instead, she'd found independence, purpose, and the beginnings of what might become something far more meaningful than the arrangement she'd originally sought. The weeks that followed fell into a pleasant rhythm. Marigold's sewing business thrived, with orders coming not just from Clearwater but from neighboring homesteads and even Helena. Mr. Hoffman proudly expanded her workspace to include a fitting area behind a curtain and ordered additional fabrics and notions to meet the growing demand. Every Saturday, Yates came to town. Sometimes they simply shared a meal and conversation. Other times, true to his word, he took her riding, teaching her to handle his gentle mare, Penny. Marigold proved an apt pupil, quickly progressing from terrified to confident in the saddle. As December arrived, Clearwater prepared for its annual Christmas social, to be held the Saturday before Christmas in the church meeting hall. It was, Mrs. Gunderson informed Marigold, the social event of the year, when even the most isolated ranchers and homesteaders made the effort to come to town. "You'll need a proper dress," Mrs. Gunderson declared one evening. "Something that shows off that tiny waist of yours." "I have my blue wool," Marigold protested. "That's a perfectly respectable dress for Sunday services, but not for the Christmas social," the older woman insisted. "Every unmarried girl for 50 miles will be there in her finest, hoping to catch a husband. You need to stand out." "I'm not looking to catch a husband," Marigold replied, though her thoughts immediately went to Yates. Mrs. Gunderson gave her a knowing look. "Maybe not any husband, but perhaps one particular man. A certain rancher with blue eyes who finds reasons to come to town twice as often as he used to." Marigold busied herself with the dishes to hide her blush. "Yates and I are friends. He's been kind to me, that's all." "MMHMM," Mrs. Gunderson hummed skeptically. "And I'm the Queen of England. That man looks at you like you're water in the desert." "Trust me. I've known Yates Irving since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." The idea both thrilled and terrified Marigold. In the 6 weeks since her arrival in Clearwater, her feelings for Yates had grown from gratitude to admiration to something deeper she was hesitant to name. But marriage. She'd already made the mistake of rushing toward that particular commitment once. Nevertheless, the next day found her selecting a length of rich emerald green silk that Mr. Hoffman had just received from Helena. It cost nearly a week's wages, but as she ran her fingers over the luxurious fabric, Marigold decided it was worth it. She worked on the dress in the evenings after the store closed, using a pattern she'd modified to accentuate her slender figure. The bodice featured a modest but flattering neckline, the sleeves were fitted to show off her graceful arms, and the skirt fell in elegant pleats from a tightly cinched waist. The Saturday before the social, Yates arrived at the store just as Marigold was finishing a fitting with Mrs. Hoffman. The German woman exclaimed over the beautiful emerald creation Marigold had made for herself. "You will be the belle of the social," Mrs. Hoffman declared. "Every man there will want to dance." "There's only one man's opinion that matters," Yates said quietly when Mrs. Hoffman had left. The intensity in his gaze made Marigold's breath catch. "And whose opinion might that be?" she asked, trying to keep her voice light. "Mine," he replied without hesitation. "And I think you'd be beautiful in sackcloth, Marigold Owens." The compliment was so unexpected and sincere that she found herself momentarily speechless. Before she could respond, the store bell jangled and several customers entered, breaking the moment. Yates tipped his hat. "I'll see you at the social next Saturday. Save me a dance." "I'll save you several," she promised. The night of the Christmas social arrived with clear skies and bitter cold. Mrs. Gunderson helped Marigold style her hair in an elegant arrangement of curls, secured with her mother's pearl combs, one of the few family heirlooms she'd brought west. "There," Mrs. Gunderson said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "Yates Irving won't know what hit him." The church meeting hall had been transformed with pine boughs, red ribbons, and dozens of candles. A small group of musicians, including Mr. Peterson on fiddle, played lively tunes while couples danced and others chatted around the edges of the room. A long table held an impressive array of food, from roasted turkeys to pies of every description. Marigold entered with Mrs. Gunderson, immediately conscious of the many eyes that turned in her direction. The green silk dress had turned out even better than she'd hoped, the rich color highlighting her honey-brown hair and fair complexion. "Miss Owens, you look like a Christmas angel," Sheriff Donovan greeted her. "Might I have the honor of the first dance?" Before she could answer, a familiar voice spoke from behind her. "I believe Miss Owens promised her first dance to me." Marigold turned to find Yates standing there, looking more handsome than she'd ever seen him in a black suit and crisp white shirt. His usually unruly hair had been tamed, and he'd trimmed his beard to neat perfection. Sheriff Donovan grinned knowingly. "Can't blame a man for trying, Irving. Perhaps later, Miss Owens." With a tip of his hat, he moved on. "You look—" Yates seemed to struggle for words. "I've never seen anything as beautiful as you are tonight." The compliment warmed her from within. "You clean up rather nicely yourself." He offered his arm. "Shall we dance?" For a man who claimed to have little social experience, Yates proved to be an excellent dancer, guiding her confidently through a waltz. Marigold was acutely aware of his hand at her waist, the slight roughness of his palm against her fingers, the clean scent of soap and pine that clung to him. "Everyone's watching us," she murmured, noting the interested glances from around the room. "Let them watch," Yates replied, his eyes never leaving her face. "I'm the envy of every man here." They danced 3 dances in succession before propriety demanded they separate for a while. Marigold found herself surrounded by townspeople eager to compliment her dress and inquire about commissioning similar garments. She accepted an invitation to dance from Mr. Hoffman, then from Sheriff Donovan, but her eyes constantly sought out Yates in the crowd. She found him deep in conversation with a striking dark-haired woman in an elaborate burgundy dress that screamed of city wealth. The woman had her hand possessively on Yates's arm, her face tilted up to his with obvious familiarity. "That's Vivian Wilcox," Mrs. Gunderson said, suddenly beside her. "Her father owns half the businesses in Helena. She's had her eye on Yates for years. They seem close," Marigold observed, trying to ignore the pang of jealousy. "She thinks so," Mrs. Gunderson replied dryly. "Yates is too polite to set her straight. But don't you worry, he hasn't taken his eyes off you all evening, even while she's been chattering at him." As if to prove her point, Yates looked up at that moment, his gaze finding Marigold across the room. The smile he gave her was intimate, exclusive, making it clear where his interest lay. Later, as the evening was winding down, Yates found her again. "Would you walk outside with me for a moment? There's something I'd like to discuss." Curious, Marigold accepted his arm. He helped her into her cloak and they stepped out into the crisp night air. Stars blanketed the sky, brilliant in the clear mountain atmosphere, and their breath formed clouds in the freezing air. They walked a short distance from the church, stopping beneath a large pine tree whose branches offered some shelter from the cold. "I wanted to give you this," Yates said, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. "Consider it an early Christmas gift." Surprised, Marigold carefully unwrapped it to find a small wooden box carved with intricate wildflowers. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a delicate gold locket. "Yates, it's beautiful," she breathed, lifting it to examine the fine engraving. "Open it," he encouraged. Inside was a tiny pressed flower, a marigold. "How did you find a marigold in December in Montana?" she asked, deeply touched. "I pressed it last September before I even knew you existed," he admitted. "My mother always planted them. When I saw it, something told me to preserve it. Now I know why." With gentle fingers, he took the locket from her and fastened it around her neck. "It suits you." "Thank you," Marigold said, reaching up to touch the gift. "I didn't get you anything. You've given me more than you know," he interrupted, his voice low and intense. "Marigold, I need to ask you something important." Her heart began to race. "Yes." The spring cattle drive to Helena leaves in April. I'll be gone for nearly a month." He took both her hands in his. "When I return, would you consider coming to live at my ranch? As my wife?" Though she'd begun to hope for this very question, the reality of it still took her breath away. "Yates, are you certain? We've known each other such a short time." "I've never been more certain of anything," he said firmly. "I know it hasn't been long, but I feel like I've been waiting for you my whole life. That day at the station, finding you there alone, it was like Providence stepped in and gave me exactly what I didn't know I needed." Marigold thought of the lonely platform, the coat laid down for her to sit upon, the simple kindness that had blossomed into something neither of them had expected. "Life on a ranch isn't easy," he continued. "There will be hardships, isolation, long days of work, but I promise you this, you'll never face any of it alone. I'll be beside you always." Tears welled in Marigold's eyes, not from sadness but from the overwhelming certainty that this was right. That he was right. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you, Yates Irving." His face lit with such joy that it nearly undid her. Without hesitation, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her their first kiss beneath the star-studded Montana sky. His lips were warm despite the cold air, gentle yet insistent, and Marigold melted into the embrace, her arms sliding around his neck. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Yates pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you, Marigold Owens. I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you standing alone on that platform." "And I love you," she replied, realizing the truth of it with absolute clarity. "My cowboy who laid down his coat and simply said here." They returned to the social hand in hand, their shared joy evident to everyone. Mrs. Gunderson took one look at them and burst into tears of happiness, declaring she'd known all along they were meant for each other. Mr. Hoffman insisted on opening his last bottle of imported champagne to toast the engagement, and even Vivian Wilcox managed a tight-lipped congratulations before departing early. The wedding was set for late April, after Yates returned from the cattle drive. In the meantime, Marigold continued her sewing work, setting aside part of her earnings to purchase things for their home. Yates visited town every Saturday without fail, often staying through Sunday to escort Marigold to church services before returning to his ranch. During these visits, they discussed their future together, making plans and sharing dreams. Yates described the ranch house small but sturdy, with room to expand when we need it, and Marigold talked about the curtains and quilts she wanted to make for their home. "I want children," she told him one snowy afternoon as they sat before the fire in Mrs. Gunderson's parlor. "At least 2, maybe more." Yates's face softened at the mention of children. "I'd like that. The ranch is too quiet sometimes. It needs the sound of little feet running across the porch, little voices calling from the yard." In March, Yates brought Marigold to see the ranch for the first time. The snow had begun to melt, revealing patches of mud and early spring grass. As they crested the final hill, the spread lay before them, a sturdy 2-story house built of logs and local stone, a large barn, corrals, and outbuildings, all nestled in a protected valley with mountains rising in the distance. "It's not much compared to some of the big outfits," Yates said, watching her reaction carefully. "It's perfect," Marigold breathed, taking in the peaceful setting. She could easily imagine herself here, could see children playing in the yard, flowers blooming along the walkway, curtains fluttering in open windows during summer. Yates showed her through the house, pointing out recent improvements he'd made with her comfort in mind: a larger kitchen window to let in more light, new shelves for her books, a bedroom set ordered from a catalog in Helena. "This is my mother's piano," he said, running his hand lovingly over the upright instrument that dominated one corner of the main room. "I had it tuned last week. Thought you might enjoy playing it." "I'd love to hear you play," Marigold encouraged, sitting on the bench and patting the spot beside her. With a self-conscious smile, Yates joined her and began to play. His technique wasn't polished, but there was genuine feeling in the way he rendered a simple folk melody. Marigold found herself more moved by this unassuming performance than by many technically perfect concerts she'd attended in Boston. When he finished, she rewarded him with a kiss. "Your mother would be proud of you, Yates, of everything you've built here." "I hope so," he said, his voice slightly rough with emotion. "I've tried to create something worthy of passing on to our children someday." The day Yates left for the cattle drive dawned clear but cool, with the promise of spring in the air. He stopped by the boarding house at dawn to say goodbye to Marigold, who had risen early to see him off. "It's only a few weeks," he reminded her, though his tight embrace suggested he was reassuring himself as much as her. "I'll be back before you know it, and then we'll be married." "I'll be counting the days," she promised, fighting back tears. The prospect of not seeing him for nearly a month seemed unbearable after the regular comfort of his presence. "I've asked Sheriff Donovan to check on you," Yates said, "and Mrs. Gunderson has promised to let me know if you need anything. I've made arrangements at the general store for you to take whatever supplies you need on my account." "I'll be fine," Marigold assured him, touched by his concern. "I have plenty of sewing to keep me busy, and Mrs. Peterson has invited me to join her reading circle." With a final kiss that lingered with the promise of their future together, Yates mounted his horse and rode away to join the other ranchers and cowboys at the gathering point outside town. Marigold watched until he disappeared from view, the gold locket warm against her skin beneath her dress. The weeks of Yates's absence passed slowly despite Marigold's full schedule. She finished several commissioned dresses, helped Mrs. Gunderson with spring cleaning at the boarding house, and even began sewing items for her trousseau nightgowns, petticoats, and a special white dress for their wedding. News from the cattle drive came sporadically through telegraph messages relayed from Helena. The herd was moving well, prices were strong, and the men expected to return on schedule. 2 days before Yates was due back, disaster struck. A spring blizzard roared down from the north, catching everyone by surprise with its ferocity. Telegraph lines went down, roads became impassable, and Clearwater found itself isolated. "Don't worry," Sheriff Donovan reassured the townspeople gathered at the general store. "These spring storms usually blow themselves out quickly. The men know what to do, they'll find shelter and wait it out." But as one day stretched into 3, then 5, worry gnawed at Marigold. She took to watching the northern road from the boarding house window, straining to see through the diminishing snow for any sign of riders. On the 6th day, as the storm finally cleared completely, a lone rider appeared. Marigold's heart leapt, then plummeted when she realized it wasn't Yates but one of the younger cowboys who'd gone on the drive. The news he brought was grim. The storm had scattered the herd, and the men had separated to round up the cattle. Yates, along with 2 others, had gone after a group that fled into a narrow canyon. Hours later, the other 2 men returned reporting that a flash flood caused by the rapid snowmelt had swept through the canyon. They found one of the men half drowned, clinging to a tree, Mrs. Gunderson told Marigold gently. The other was injured but alive. "Yates, they haven't found him yet." Marigold felt as if the ground had fallen away beneath her feet. "No," she whispered. "No, he can't be gone. We're to be married next week." Mrs. Gunderson embraced her as she collapsed, sobbing. "There's still hope, child. Yates Irving is the strongest, most resourceful man I know. If anyone could survive, it's him. A search party was formed immediately, with Sheriff Donovan leading a dozen men back toward the canyon. Marigold begged to go with them, but the sheriff gently refused. "The terrain is treacherous, Miss Owens. We'll bring him home to you one way or another, I promise." For 3 days, Marigold moved through a fog of fear and desperate hope. She continued her sewing, finding that the familiar rhythm of needle and thread kept her from falling completely into despair. Each night, she prayed for Yates's safe return, clutching the gold locket he had given her. On the 4th day, just as dusk was falling, shouts from the street drew her to the window. A group of riders was approaching, moving slowly. In their midst was a wagon, and lying in the back. Marigold ran from the boarding house without stopping for her shawl, her heart in her throat. As she reached the wagon, Sheriff Donovan stepped forward to intercept her. "He's alive, Miss Owens," the sheriff said quickly, seeing the terror in her face. "Badly injured but alive. Doc Sanders is with him now." Marigold peered into the wagon to see Yates lying motionless, his face pale beneath a layer of grime, one arm splinted, a bloody bandage around his head. But his chest rose and fell with regular breaths, and when she whispered his name, his eyelids fluttered. "Mary," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "Find my way back to you." They took him to the doctor's home, where Marigold refused to leave his side. Doctor Sanders diagnosed a broken arm, 3 cracked ribs, and a concussion, but declared that Yates's remarkable constitution would see him through. "He was pinned under a fallen tree when we found him," Sheriff Donovan explained. "Said he'd been there since the flood, going in and out of consciousness. It's a miracle he survived the exposure alone, never mind the injuries." "He's too stubborn to die," Mrs. Gunderson declared confidently, "especially with a wedding to attend. Recovery was slow and often painful." Yates chafed at his confinement, insisting he needed to return to his ranch, check on his remaining cattle, prepare for Marigold's arrival as his wife. It took the combined efforts of the doctor, Sheriff Donovan, and Marigold herself to convince him to stay in town until he was stronger. "Your neighbor Jenkins is looking after the place," Marigold reminded him during one particularly frustrated moment. "And I'm not going anywhere. Our wedding can wait until you're well." Yates captured her hand in his good one. "I don't want to wait. I've nearly lost you once because of my own foolishness, thinking I could outrun a storm. I don't want to waste another day." And so, 6 weeks after the accident, with Yates still using a cane and his arm in a sling, they were married in a simple ceremony at the Clearwater Church. Marigold wore the white dress she'd sewn during his absence, adorned with lace sent by Mr. Hoffman's sister from St. Louis. Yates wore his Sunday suit, his face still bearing faint scars from his ordeal, but his eyes bright with happiness as they spoke their vows. The entire town turned out for the celebration afterward, held in the same meeting hall where they danced at the Christmas social. Mrs. Gunderson cried through the entire ceremony and most of the reception, declaring it the happiest day since her own wedding 40 years earlier. As the sun began to set, Yates and Marigold prepared to depart for the ranch, their home now. Friends had decorated their wagon with ribbons and flowers and attached old boots to the back in the traditional manner. "Are you ready, Mrs. Irving?" Yates asked as he helped her into the wagon, his touch gentle despite his still healing injuries. "I've been ready since the day you laid your coat down for me on that platform," Marigold replied, leaning into his side as he took up the reins. Their arrival at the ranch in the gathering dusk revealed a final surprise. The women of Clearwater had visited earlier in the day, cleaning the house from top to bottom, hanging the curtains Marigold had sewn, and preparing a wedding supper that waited for them in the kitchen. On the porch railing sat a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a framed photograph of Yates's parents and sister, along with a note from Mrs. Gunderson, to remind you of the past as you build your future together. That night, as they lay in their marriage bed, Marigold nestled against Yates's good side, careful of his still healing ribs. The moonlight streamed through the window, painting silver patterns across the quilt. "Are you happy?" Yates asked, his fingers gently stroking her hair. "Completely," she assured him. "Though I still can't believe how my life has changed in just 6 months. I arrived in Montana Territory expecting to marry a man who didn't exist, and instead found you the most real, honest man I've ever known." "Providence," Yates murmured, echoing what he'd said the night he proposed. "Sometimes life takes us on unexpected paths to get us exactly where we're meant to be." The years that followed brought both joys and challenges, as life on a Montana ranch inevitably did. Their first winter as a married couple tested Marigold's resilience, with temperatures dropping to 30 below zero and snow piling 6 feet deep around the house. But she found, to her surprise, that Yates had been right. She could indeed see beauty in the blizzard, especially when viewed from the warmth of their home, her husband's arms around her. Spring brought renewal to the land, and the news that Marigold was expecting their first child. Yates's joy knew no bounds. He spent weeks crafting a cradle from pine harvested on their own land, carving it with the same wildflower pattern that adorned the box he'd given her for the locket. Their son, William, was born on a crisp October day with Mrs. Gunderson acting as midwife. He had Yates's blue eyes and Marigold's determined chin, and his father declared him the most perfect baby ever born in the territory. 2 years later, twins Emma and Eliza joined the family, arriving during a spring thunderstorm that Yates insisted was nature's way of announcing 2 such spirited girls. The ranch house expanded along with their family, a new bedroom wing, a larger kitchen, a covered porch that wrapped around 3 sides of the house where the children could play protected from the summer sun or winter snow. Marigold continued her sewing, though now it was primarily for her growing family rather than paying customers. Still, her reputation as a skilled seamstress remained, and occasionally she took special commissions, wedding dresses for daughters of friends, christening gowns for babies, once even curtains for the new schoolhouse in Clearwater. The town itself grew and prospered. The railroad finally reached them in 1885, bringing increased trade and new settlers. Hoffman's General Store expanded to twice its original size, and Sheriff Donovan gained 2 deputies to help maintain order in the growing community. Through it all, Yates and Marigold remained at the heart of both the town and their ranch. Their home became known for its hospitality, often hosting neighbors during blizzards, new settlers needing temporary shelter, or community gatherings when the meeting hall in town proved too small. On the 20th anniversary of the day they met, Yates surprised Marigold with a trip to Helena, where they stayed in the finest hotel and attended a real theatrical production, a luxury they'd never indulged in before. "You ever regret it?" he asked as they lay in the unfamiliar hotel bed, the sounds of the city strange to their ears after so long on the ranch. "Coming west, staying in Montana, choosing this life with me." Marigold propped herself up on one elbow to look at him properly. At 48, Yates's dark hair was liberally streaked with silver, and the lines around his eyes had deepened with years of squinting into the sun. But those eyes were still the same vivid blue that had caught her attention that first day, and they still looked at her with the same adoration. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment. You gave me everything I never knew I wanted: a true partner, a family, a home built with love. Yates pulled her down for a kiss that held the same tenderness as their first. Do you remember what I told you that night at the Christmas social? That I'd been waiting for you my whole life without knowing it. I remember. I was right, he said simply. These 20 years with you have been the greatest blessing a man could ask for. When they returned to the ranch, their children, now young adults, had prepared a celebration, inviting half the county to honor their parents' anniversary. William, studying to be a doctor in Denver but home for the occasion, had arranged for a photographer to take a family portrait, the first they'd ever had. For the grandchildren you'll hopefully give us someday, Marigold told her son with a meaningful glance at the young schoolteacher from Clearwater, who'd been keeping company with William whenever he was home. Emma, who had inherited her father's affinity for ranching, presented them with plans for expanding the cattle operation. With the new railroad spur, we can reach markets in Chicago directly, she explained excitedly. The Irving ranch could double in size within 5 years. Eliza, the artistic one who reminded Marigold so much of herself at that age, had sewn a magnificent quilt depicting scenes from their life together: the train platform where they met, their wedding day, the birth of each child, the ranch through the seasons. As twilight fell and lanterns were lit around the yard, the musicians struck up a waltz. Without a word, Yates led Marigold to the center of the makeshift dance floor, the same barn floor where they had taught their children to dance years ago. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Irving?" he asked formally, his eyes twinkling. "Always, Mr. Irving," she replied, stepping into his arms as naturally as breathing. As they danced beneath the Montana stars, Marigold reflected on the journey that had brought them here from a cold, lonely train platform to this moment surrounded by family and friends. Life had not always been easy, but it had been rich and full in all the ways that mattered. The gold locket still hung around her neck, the pressed marigold inside now fragile with age but preserved like their love, a small, precious thing that had blossomed into something enduring and beautiful. And it had all begun with a simple act of kindness. A cowboy who laid down his coat and said, "Here,